wait for your cue.
It's loading now. You're all set.
Okay, great. So good morning, everyone. This is the first meeting of the 2021-22 biennium of the Senate Natural Resources and Energy Committee. My name is Chris Bray, and I'm delighted to be serving again on this committee. Today's work is just going to be introductions and first tour through committee priorities, as well as meeting everyone on our legal team and our committee assistant, Jude Newman, who's gone discreetly to a name. So everyone should know that she's a key member of our committee as well. So my sense is life is short, legislative time is even shorter. I always want people to feel like their time is well spent in here, and that we'll try to be respectful of your time, get work done, start and stop on time, and move things along as best we can, and make sure everyone feels heard and included. If we were in our actual committee room, you would see two things. One on the whiteboard, and now I've recreated that here. You can't see it, it's off camera. There's a whiteboard here, and it says across the top, start with yes. And that's because it's, to me, it's just too easy to get stuck on problems. And so I'm always figuring there's a way to get there. So let's start with yes. No is too easy. And we're almost done with the propaganda. And there's also on the wall, there is this, and people go, what? Are you, especially right now, who are you kidding? But to me, optimism is actually not about a Pollyanna-ish sort of thing. It's that I've seen this committee, this Senate, this legislator, Vermonters at large, when they buckle down and work on something, they can make good changes. And so that's my version of optimism, working well with other people and making positive change, however big or small. So with that, I just wanted to talk a couple logistical things. Zoom is kind of a numbing universe to work in. So from all the reading I've been doing over the years, plus more Zoom information, it's great to take a break. So I'm proposing that we go an hour and then take a 10-minute break, do a second hour, a second brief break, 10 minutes, and then we'll finish up. And if you add up the timing there, that would have us finishing at 11:50, not noon. And I'd like to aim to do that so that if people have noontime commitments, they don't have Zoom session jamming right into the next Zoom session. They'll have a little break between those things. It's just seems like it'll be good for our mental and physical health. I don't know if you can take a 5-minute walk on your break or whatever it will be, but I'd like to start there and experiment with it. If it doesn't work, we'll make adjustments. Generally, I found that we're always well behaved, but it is helpful, especially when we have witnesses, if we do the old-fashioned raise hands to be called on thing. It just helps us keep the flow going more smoothly. But of course, we'll get to discussion points where, especially later in bill development, where it will turn more into a conversation. So I just wanted to do that. One other quick thing is organizationally, we, Senator Westman, you are the vice chair of the committee, so welcome aboard in that capacity. It's always been my feeling that I always want to include the vice chair. Sometimes it's more titular than real, and so with Senator Campion, when he was in that seat, I tried to include him in meetings as well as CC him on many things when I was handling correspondence, so that could stay in the loop. And also, if I were ever out, that would put him in a better position to take the reins and go. But we don't have a clerk, so I wanted to pause and say, do we have anyone who is interested in serving as our committee clerk? I'm seeing a mad scramble to win that position. And Senator Campion, you have been the clerk. Are you willing to continue in that job?
I am. I'm happy to. If since Senator Westman bumped me from being vice chair, stripped me of that title, I am happy to take on this new role. Of course, I'm joking. I'm thrilled for Senator Westman, and I'm happy to do whatever is helpful to the committee. Just glad to be back here.
All right. Well, thank you very much. I think usually it's relatively light duty. The trickiest thing gets when we started having all the appointments come through, and we have to keep track of everyone who needs to get interviewed and then reported out on the floor. So there'll be a whole new crew. Senator McCormick.
I want to congratulate Senator Campion on becoming clerk. I was so looking forward to the possibility here.
Thanks, Senator McCormick. Thank you.
Senator McDonald.
I'm glad to have Senator Westman join us. And what I would ask Senator Westman, who I served with in the House years ago, if he might share with us the various committees he served on over the years, so we fully understand the breadth of knowledge that has joined us.
Are you picking on my age?
No, you were no. Only someone as youthful as yourself could have endured those variety of committees.
I don't think I served on a natural resources committee in either body since the 1980s.
Wow.
Does that cover enough?
That's a great introduction. Continue.
I'm not sure I can remember. I've served on judiciary in the House. I served on government operations through two reapportionments in the House. I served for 3 months on an ag committee. I chaired transportation. I've chaired appropriations in the House. And as I said, natural resources I served on for 4 years in the House. In the Senate, I've been on finance, appropriations, health and welfare, and transportation. I'm probably missing something. Oh, I served on health and welfare in the House also.
Were you around Ways and Means?
I didn't serve on Ways and Means.
Right. Well, great.
I served on institutions for half of the 3 months I was on agriculture. I did 3 months on institutions.
For good behavior.
Senator McCormick.
Rich, who chaired House Natural Resources when you were on it?
Henry Curse.
From Heinsberg with the Scotch Highland beef.
With Highland beef, yep.
Okay, they look like woolly mastodons out there during a snowstorm. Right. Oh, great. Okay, well, one of the things seriously I was thinking about getting ready for today is that this committee has a great deal of experience. So I'm really looking forward to this team because people have been, there's a lot of information in this group, and it's going to help us because we have some pretty thorny issues, a lot of which have been persistent. So they're not very easy to solve. So I know that the Legislative Council is, their in baskets, I think, are full and then some. So I don't want to keep them long here. I bet they all have other things to get back to, but I did want to pause and ask Mr. Martland to introduce himself, and then the other staff that will be joining us, and also to help the committee understand who will be drafting and what areas, so we know to whom we should turn as we work on something.
Well, thank you, Senator Bray, and good morning, everybody. This is Luke Marland from Legislative Council. I think I know all of you, so I don't need to introduce myself in any detail. But for those of you who are new to the committee, I handle energy-related topics and climate change-related issues. So if it's something to do with DPS, PUC, Vermont gas, electric, energy, renewables, addressing climate change, that would probably be the bill that I would handle. And I'll let the other attorneys introduce themselves and cover their subject areas. Michael O'Grady, who is frequently before this committee and handles a number of areas, can't be here today, but I think you all know him. And I think those of you who are experienced on the committee know the subject areas that he normally handles, and I'm sure he can check in with you perhaps next week. Ellen, would you like to go?
Sure. Hello, everyone. Ellen Tchaikovsky. That's Tchaikovsky, for those of you wondering. I handle natural resources law, which primarily includes land use, which translates generally to Act 250 and municipal zoning. I also work on some wildlife issues, including endangered species and hunting, as well as air pollution and some forestry. So I do sort of split some of the topics with Mike O'Grady, so we overlap a little bit, but most of the time you'll probably see me on Act 250 related things.
Great, thank you.
And joining us is our law clerk this session, Kelly Mcgill.
Good morning.
Good morning, everyone. I am the law clerk for Ellen and Michael, as well as Maria Royal this year. I graduated from Harvard Law School this past May. While I was in law school, I spent my time specializing to the extent that I could on agricultural law and environmental law. So I'm very excited to help with this committee however I can.
Great. Welcome.
Great. Thank you. Welcome. So thank you all to the legal team that helps us get our work done, and good to meet you, Ms. Mcgill, and good to see you again, Ms. Tchaikovsky and Mr. Martland. And if you all have things that need to get back to, then thanks for checking in. I don't know if there's any committee questions before you go. Okay, seeing none, thanks again. And Luke, I did see your email this morning, so I'll be following up. Thanks. All right, so with that, I think everyone's heard it in caucus, and the general lay of the land for the session is picking up on COVID issues first before moving on to anything else. So from my perspective, if that means to look at what we did last year, since last March related to COVID, and it was a relatively narrow band of things that we connected through. So we looked at solid waste to make sure that those systems were still working. We looked at municipal wastewater. We looked at potable water systems, and we partnered with finance on. That really is, it's really their bailiwick to be checking on utilities and disconnects. So I'll, in the afternoon, I think we'll address that. We'll stick to our knitting and just make sure that all those provisions are still working. I'm from having conversations in the last month getting ready, I'm not hearing about any kind of issues. Wastewater treatment plants continue to operate well. Towns have done mutual aid agreements that would allow operators from one, because they're lightly staffed, if there was a COVID outbreak and all of a sudden there was reduced staff available to run such a plant, towns made basically something along the lines of mutual aid agreements to help each other out in running their facilities, and resolve some liability issues that could come up if Town A's operator were to make a mistake at Town B's plant. So I think we're pretty much all set there. Yes, Senator Westman.
So in the Joint Fiscal Committee, we did take on the issue and we put money aside for people that were behind on their payments for water and sewer. And that program ran out of money. So what we might want to do and not take a lot of time on it is find out how short they are. And with the new federal money coming down, would we want to make have a short time where we found out how much more there is needed? Because I think they ran out of they ran out rather quickly of the money that was set aside for payments to operate sewer and water plants.
Okay, great, thank you. And that points up the questions that I'd like to ask the operating areas that we'll have in before the committee from A&R, for instance. What COVID and CARES related activities and funding did they have in 2020, and what's the need going forward in 2021? And is there anything new, or is it mostly continuing what they've already had? Senator Westman?
I might be mistaken, but I think that money was sent to the Public Service Department. Right. But if it is for fees to operate a sewage treatment plant, I would think that we might be interested.
Right. Thank you. Okay. And then, depending on what the committee priorities are, once we've covered our bases there, because they are relatively narrow, I think, we're going to have, compared to some other committees, more time to do work on things that aren't directly tied to COVID. For instance, my old afternoon committee, government operations, I think is going to be busy responding to COVID-related things, maybe for the entire session. Not exclusively, but I think there'll be things coming up, or economic development, for instance. So with anticipating that we're going to have the ability to take on other things, I'd like to pause and go around the room and ask people, what's top of mind for you in terms of priorities for the coming session. And I'll start with, I'm going to go by the tiles as they're in order on my screen. So Senator Campion, do you have some thoughts on what you'd like to see us take on in 21 or 21-22?
Sure. I mean, one of the things that is a priority for me, and it's aligning, of course, with agriculture, is to get to the issue of soil health and regenerative soils, and how can we work with the Agriculture Committee to start moving us, in that direction. Getting farmers to do best practices, working with them to make certain that their practices are, both good for the work they're doing, for the environment, for water, etc. The other thing people have heard me talk about in the past, also somewhat certainly connected to agriculture, is spreading of sludge and PFAS. We know that this practice is happening in this state. We know that it's happening all over the country, and PFOA, given its weight, has caused an ecological disaster. We know that PFOA is really everywhere. I feel like we've all had good conversations with the Department of Environmental Conservation, as well as the Secretary, and they're cognizant of this. And I think there really aren't easy solutions to this without starting to take PFOA out of consumer items and really making certain that we're not putting them in landfills. So that's a piece of it. The other piece of it, though, is the bigger piece is, what factories have left behind and what industry has left behind. And so I think part of what we could do, and I'm still working on this with some other people, is, how do we equip communities to deal with this? I mean, again, PFOA, we know, is everywhere and it continues to be everywhere, but communities are now going to have to deal with this, and in their water systems, in their soils, and we should be giving tools to communities to keep them safe, to make sure they know how to effectively monitor their own situations, and partner with the state. So that's the angle I'm taking. Some may recall that I considered, a moratorium on the disbursement of sludge in farm fields. I think everyone, our agency, everyone realizes this is a terrible practice because PFOA is ubiquitous. It's continuing harm. The question is, what do you do with it? It means you ship it somewhere else to another state. You put it, send it somewhere else where it's dealt with, where it's put in the air. I mean, this is a huge issue. So I'll continue to work on that. I'm interested in my work with Education Committee. I'd like to partner with this committee looking at issues of PCBs, continuing the work of lead in schools, and also the radon issue. So there are certainly some overlaps there between these two committees, and those are additional priorities for me. So those are some of the things that I'm thinking about. There are a few others, but I'd say those are some of the some other bills coming in, but those are some of the big pictures.
Great. And I think, back during the, assuming I'd be back in the committee, Senator Ruth reached out to me in November, December about PCBs because Burlington High School, they've had to move out of the building. I think they're going to the old Macy's downtown.
They are. Because
of PCB levels in the school. I had talked over the summer and fall with Secretary Moore about it, but I think this is a great thing for us to learn more about, and it's timely. So I
think part of what, and sorry to interrupt, but I think as in my conversations with Philip, it's there are state standards and then there are the federal standards, and the state standards, if they're reviewed in all of our schools, there's the possibility that other schools are going to have this issue, and then how do we deal with it? Right.
I think Senator Ruth's way of saying it to me is Burlington like the canary in the mine shaft? Like,
yeah.
They happen to get tested, found it. Now, what happens if we inventory every other school of the same vintage or something like that? And the state, just before we go on, Secretary Moore said they did do some preliminary inventorying of PCB in recent years, but not very recent. So more to go there. All right. Here on the Hollywood Square screen, next screen block over is Senator Westman. What's on your mind for this session?
For this session, well, I'm new here, so I don't have the breadth of the great senator from Bennington. So I'm interested in the renewable energy issues as we take that up to be completely open and above board. I do spend 2 days a month on the board at Vermont Electric Co-op, and we talk a lot about how fast we can get to carbon-free versus totally renewable, and and there is somewhat of a conflict in that because the quicker we go, we become carbon-free, the more pressure it puts on the cost, and that balancing act that is around that, I'm very interested in those issues. Also, it hasn't traditionally been an issue here, but this is natural resources and energy, and there is a component that is whatever we do about broadband, the fiber that gets run will be on utility poles. It's traditionally been a finance committee area, but because this is an energy committee and there is a nexus to hooking up to utility poles, literally the utility at Vermont Electric Co-op, which is in the rural areas like Washington Electric is, those are the areas that have the poorest broadband coverage. And even if those utility companies don't go into the business themselves, there has to be upgrade to their poles and their infrastructure to allow other companies to do that. And I think that this committee could be in some degree helpful to a finance committee if we spent a little time on that and made some recommendations to the finance committee.
Okay, thank you. I know that I've talked with both Washington Electric Co-op and Vermont Electric Co-op in the last month about broadband infrastructure and the role that increased communications will play in terms of managing a more dynamic distribution system and dynamic grid. So I would
just say, I think every utility in the state, but particularly Vermont Electric and Washington, that have huge areas that are underserved in broadband, are in the process of doing studies and have done a lot of work around what would it take to improve the infrastructure in their areas to allow for the fiber to be run, to have it available for a company to be put together. Whether they run a company or not, and I think in both cases, it may be a different answer for either one, but they have the infrastructure whereby we would run that. So I would, we might want to hear about that. So
yeah, great. Okay, so that'll be on our list. Anything else, Senator Westman?
That's, as the new kid on the block, that's probably enough right now. I would defer to the great senator from Bennington, or maybe even the senator from Orange, who has long experience on this committee, longer than anybody else here.
I think that I think that's true. And speaking of which, Senator from Orange, I never call you that. Senator McDonald, what's on your to-do list for this session?
Well, two of them have already been dealt with. Senator Westman and the broadband. That is certainly a rural issue and rural development, and is established in the serving of electricity years ago as the best route, the best resource for broadband, and I hope we develop that in the way that he explained a few minutes ago. Senator Campion and regenerative soils, we've talked about this in natural resources a couple times. Every dollar you spend on regenerative soils gets you $2 worth of benefit. One is that it helps keep our lake clean and avoids the monies that you need to expend to clean up the lake. And two, it sequesters carbon. They're not often you can spend a tax dollar and get two benefits out of it. My other one is dealing with, most important one is dealing with climate change. And everything about this COVID emergency tends to drive climate change issues out of the conversation and say once again, that we got plenty of time to deal with this. It's a big overarching issue, and we'll take it up later when the current problems are resolved. And that's my biggest fear, that we won't tackle that with the immediacy that it deserves. I think there's plenty of work to be done in the transportation area. We know that Vermonters and Americans are buying bigger cars, and that the efficiency level of those cars is going down, and we're heading in the wrong direction. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Okay, thank you, Senator McDonald. I do share your concern about the pandemic. I mean, it's appropriate that we respond to it as an emergency, as it is, but it, you know, in terms of like disasters, it reminds me more of like a lightning strike and climate change being a glacier that's approaching the town. You know, it's I think in the end, climate change will be more damaging, but it's slower to move, and it's harder for us to appreciate just how urgent it is because of that. So we'll have
Most appropriate analogy, Mr. Chair.
yeah. Okay, Senator McCormick, good morning, and what's on your mind for this session?
Okay, well, first of all, let me just say how glad I am to be back in natural resources. I wish we were in the room. It's always, I would walk by room 8 and think that's really where I should be. This is where my heart is. This is where my interests are. This is where my skills are. Having said that, I've been out of the loop for many years, and I really feel much like a freshman on this committee. And I will look to the more senior members to reorient me. On climate change, I remember being at a rally against the war in Vietnam at some point in the late 60s, and suddenly it occurred to me, I thought, wait a minute, what happened to nuclear war? Because in the 50s and early 60s, we were worried about nuclear war, and we literally just sort of stopped thinking about it. And I feel that way about climate change, is that it's still here, and it's still the overarching existential crisis of our time. So I'm hoping that mainly we'll deal with that. There are a lot of other committees that have implications for global warming, in particular transportation. And in fact, there are other committees that have environmental implications. Their work has environmental implications: economic development, agriculture, transportation. But this is the committee that focuses on those issues. And I do want us to get to work on global warming. And I think this committee did good work last session, but we have never really risen to the occasion. That this is a far bigger problem than we're dealing with. The other thing is, I go back to 1979 and Jimmy Carter saying, you know, we can get started now, and we can work incrementally and untraumatically and gradually move towards a better energy policy. Or we can wait 30 years and we'll have an emergency. Well, it's 40 years and we do have an emergency. I very much want to work on Act 250. I was in the unfortunate position of opposing a bill that had been months in development at the end of the last session. I would like to be in on the development this time around, because I fully get the importance of making it cheaper, faster, and easier to get an Act 250 permit for downtown development. If we want downtown development, we have to expedite that. I do not like the idea of an Act 250 exemption, because first of all, the implication is that there's something wrong with Act 250, and not having to deal with it is a good thing that we're giving you. What we're basically saying is, yeah, John McClary is right. And I don't want to do that. But it's also that the Act 250 examination is good. it does good things, and I don't want to deprive our downtowns of the benefits of Act 250. And so I want to work on not getting out of Act 250, but making Act 250 and downtown development work faster and cheaper. And I think the way we can do it is with the so-called umbrella permit for designated downtowns, analogous to the umbrella permits for industrial parks. And I think it will achieve both goals of easier permitting, but also of environmental protection. And if nothing else, as a friend and a member of the committee, I look forward to the discussion. And of course, everything else as well. But that's though I would say global warming and Act 250 are my two most special interests. The other thing I would point out is I represent Windsor County, which is a former industrial power between the railroad town of White River Junction, which is a village in Hartford, and the machine tool industry in Windsor, and in particular in Springfield, and the pollution, industrial pollution issues there. It's a particular interest to my constituency, and having served with Richie on health and welfare, I have some familiarity as well with those issues. So I look forward to working on that as well.
Okay, great.
Thanks.
This committee did a little work on brownfields 2 years ago. It was if you had your permits related to brownfield cleanup, it was, I think it allowed you to check a box and not go back through Act 250, given that getting the brownfields permit, I think, was treated as more stringent than the scrutiny you would face in the Act 250 proceeding otherwise. Is that, has that been useful? I know, and it was a representative from Springfield that brought that to us at the time. I don't know if that's proved to be useful in your district or not.
Yeah, and it goes back. Matt Dunn was the big driving force on that originally, I think, when he was in the House and in the Senate. Yeah, I mean, both of my big industrial towns, Windsor and Springfield, are still struggling to come back economically. But there are sites in Springfield that really were off the page in terms of any kind of salvaging of them. And now there are facilities coming down and preparing to develop them. But I really, to be honest with you, Mr. Chairman, I wasn't ready for that question. So
Okay.
I don't want to bluff.
Yes, just day one. I'm just curious. I mean, as you know, I mean, I consider this sort of across the board. Well, I'll speak for myself, but I think it happens to other committees as well, and legislators. We work intensively on something, and then we come back on the next session or next year, and then there's a whole new crop of issues to follow up on or deal with. And it sometimes I don't think we check back in on how the work we already did, how well that's been implemented or how well it's functioning. And it's less glamorous than the new bill stuff, but sometimes I feel like just regular oversight of our existing work is probably something I'm always trying to get myself to remember to do. And to that, so, well, since I've asked all you those questions, I'm happy to put myself in the same hot seat. So I agree about the concern around climate change. And so for me, and actually this committee's worked on this through a whole series of bills, one of which is Act 62, which is going to be, it says, how might the state create an all fuels energy efficiency program? It's not quite apt to say it this way, but when I'm talking to non-legislators, I say, imagine we had an Efficiency Vermont for electrical generation the way we do. And we also had one that focused on thermal loads. And then we had another one that focused on transportation and reinterpreting the notion of efficiency to be avoiding or reducing greenhouse gas emissions per dollar spent. What's the most cost-effective way to put less junk in the air in all three of those sectors? We've done that through reductions in energy efficiency. We have negative load growth in the electric sector, but we're putting out more generally year to year on transportation and thermal. So we wrestled with ways to do that in this committee, and then asked the PUC and the department the PUC to lead a proceeding, an investigation, and they have, and their final report's due on the 15th of this month. So it'll be great to see what they bring back. I have, started drafting a bill, but I've left it, incomplete because out of respect for the work we've asked them to do, I don't want to finish drafting and introduce something contrary to or unknowingly contrary to what the PUC is going to bring us. So we'll hear from the department, we'll hear primarily from the PUC. And then I think if we create this overarching, I'd love to see us create a framework, like a legal framework that allows us to have efficiency programs in all three of those areas. We already have it for electricity, of course. And then in the thermal side, to really pick up the pace on weatherization. It is one of those, we always call it the low-hanging fruit, and then we marvel at how much of that fruit is still low and still hanging year after year. And so the goal is something along the lines of committing to 120,000 more homes weatherized in the next decade, where our current pace is roughly 2,000 homes a year between low-income weatherization and other market-based solutions. So this would be, we'd be moving up to something along the lines of a 5-fold increase over time, even higher, to make that 120,000. There's a lot of good data behind the economic benefits to the owners of those places or the renters of those places. And then there's an environmental dividend on top of it. So I'd love to see us dig into that. And happily, there's a whole group of people. I started talking with some folks in the summer, and the group has grown. And so there's happily for us, there's people already working on this that can help us when we take it up to make more rapid, deeper, faster progress. So I'll leave it at there. On the other side, we have a renewable energy standard that we haven't adjusted for a little while. I think it's maybe 5 years. It's 5 or 6 years since we first passed it. And right now we enjoy, because of that bill, the cleanest grid in the United States. We're about 62% renewable, although some people are a little squeamish about how we define renewable, because we treat large scale hydro as renewable energy. But so definitional problems aside, still we have a grid that's relatively clean, cleanest in the US. And the question is how affordably and quickly can we move to 100% renewable grid? Last year, there was I think a pretty strong consensus in the committee and amongst colleagues and all the distribution utilities themselves to get to 100% renewable by 2030. We need to, Senator Westman already brought up the point of carbon-free versus renewable. So there's nuance, of course, to the whole thing, and we'll have to learn more. But underneath it all, regardless, the construct is, if you're going to move people from fossil fuels to electricity for heating and transportation, then we want to make sure that the exhaust pipe, the source of the electricity is clean too. Otherwise, we don't want electric cars running on electricity generated by coal-fired plants someplace else. It's an interesting thing to take on. And then I think hand in glove with that is we've had a community scale renewable energy bill that I'll reintroduce and see working with the renewable energy community, folks in the trades, to see if it creates, and the utilities, to see if it creates a useful opportunity. So we know that there's an interest in more people would like to participate in clean energy, but something like 80% of homes are not suitable either because the roofs are oriented the wrong way, they're shaded, they were built a long time ago and not structurally sound for carrying panels, or they are not that individual's roof, they are a renter in that spot, and so they can't participate. So that means you'll go elsewhere if you want to participate in purchasing clean energy and supporting it. So one way to do that is a community scale project. And there are different models out there. There's purely private ones that sell their power in through a power purchase agreement to the utilities. There's folks like VEC has been doing community scale renewable energy that their own members own shares of. So there's more than one model, and I think there's an opportunity for us to learn about how to bring more clean renewable energy onto the grid more affordably over time. And happily, the technology is going our way. Panels keep getting cheaper, for instance, inverters, et cetera. So there's an opportunity there. So that's the energy side. You all have all brought up broadband, which has a natural connection for systems control and data acquisition for the grid and distribution utilities. I don't want to leave out solid waste. And this actually kind of comes all the way back to PFAS and biosolids, sludge. It's like the whole, sometimes we're like the street sweeper following the parade, cleaning up, and it's an unenviable position to be in. We're always, I think, trying to change things, go upstream on a problem and prevent it from occurring to begin with. So this committee has, for the last several years, worked on improving our solid waste programs, trying to reduce the amount of single-use plastics, for instance. There's an opportunity to address plastics and printed paper and packaging by building a program, an extended producer responsibility program. So those who create will have some role in mitigating the end-life treatment of that material. So that could be, anyway. So there's a lot of work to do. Vermont is so small, it's hard for us to do meaningful changes, I think, without any neighbors buying in. But so I think that'll be an interesting thing for us to work on. I've participated in a group over the last 8 months through National Council of Environmental Legislators. And there are states basically from, I'd say, on the East Coast, from Washington, D.C. north, that are all interested in this. We're all having the same problem, plastic waste, and how do you handle it? Would you reduce it? And then there's a West Coast group as well. So California, Washington, Oregon. So we have allies that we can work with, look at their legislation, look at their programs, and model on. How we coordinate is still, in my mind, an open challenge. But New England plus New York State is 30 million people. So if we can act in concert or with others, we can make meaningful changes. And then there's also the role we've played as well, where we press ahead on something and it becomes a useful model to others. That was certainly true of our single-use plastics bill, which, although we never set out to do this, I went to meetings where other states were referring to it as like the gold standard for single-use products. So it became useful to others, and it helped build momentum outside our own borders, as well as helping us here at home. So that's what I've been thinking about mostly, and I'd love to be able to work on this stuff with you. I figure we have no shortage of good things to work on. And with that, are there any other thoughts? Anyone want to toss something out based on what you've heard in the last half hour? Okay. So for the balance of the week, I think we'll do some of the usual. I would like to do it on the briefer side, but to have the visits with the agencies and departments with whom we work, to do relatively brief introductions, just to get the lay of the land, if there's changes in personnel and those divisions, et cetera. And then the first thing beyond just getting introduced will be to ask them about the pandemic response in its first 9 months and what they see coming through their department in the coming year, and any kind of funding related issues that go with it. So programs, policies, and funding related to their pandemic response. And then when we've finished that, I think we'll probably communicate with other committees just to make them aware. For instance, we worked with the probes last spring and forwarding information on where we saw pressure points so that appropriations wasn't getting blindsided by needs coming out of different operating areas. And we have that connection in this committee itself. Senator Westman, you're on appropriations, so that's great to have that connection directly. And with that, I think we have covered what we needed to get launched here today. Anyone else have something you'd like to share before we adjourn for the day? Okay, so Jude will be sending out, I'll be working with her this afternoon to turning some of those TBDs into the details of our agenda for the balance of the week. And you'll get a new agenda sent out to you. In general, I just always want to remember to say, in addition to this sort of high level, what are you interested in working on? It's helpful to me and helpful to the committee as a whole, as we take something on, to be explicit about what questions do you have. I mean, I like to remember to ask committee members this, to slow down and do this. It's been helpful to us in the past. What questions do you personally have on any issue we're looking at? And then who would you like to hear from? Because you all have a different pool of people in mind, and we can draw on those resources. So with that, I think we've covered the territory for today. And I just want to say welcome, thank you. I'm really looking forward to working with all of you. And we've got plenty of good stuff to take on.